Hello. Oh, let me redo the audio, just make sure. Make sure you can hear all my crunching. Sorry I'm eating on the air. That's my little M&M breakfast. Okay, gang. It is July 27th at 11 o'clock. So that must mean it is time for History of Religion 286. Last of our 3 stops for the day. And let me go ahead and get up the syllabus, and I'm also going to bring up the blackboard so I can check and just kind of what I've been doing all day today. All right, I'm bad at doing remembering to do the exact same thing for every class, but I'm trying to make sure I do this. All right, so here's the deal. First little news tidbit. It looks like we're definitely doing, unless something drastically changes the next few days, we're definitely doing on-campus kind of hybrid classes this fall, meaning that classes that are not purely online, meant to be from the beginning online, will have a classroom component, but they're going to divide us up. They're going to divide it up to where you're only there like half the time. In other words, if you're in a Tuesday, Thursday class, you'd come on Tuesday and you'd not come on Thursday, or vice versa, so that the class is divided in half, so you can spread out a little bit more social distancing and that sort of thing. There's logistical issues to work out with that, but we'll do the best we can with it. This is what we're being told to do. This is what we're going to do. I will be only in case you're curious, I will be only on the Belleville campus this fall because of the way enrollment worked out and everything. I'll be doing Monday, Wednesday, Friday classes in Belleville, 4 of them, and I'll be doing 4 Tuesday, Thursday, both sets in the morning, like 8 to noon, both day, all 5 days. If you're interested. I don't think there's anything else. So I want to look at your current situation in terms of, we'll look at the syllabus, but I also want to start out by looking at sort of the grade roster thing so I can tell what assignments are still outstanding. Hopefully all of your assignments are outstanding. Get it? Let's see. Okay, so you've got your first exam, second exam, and third exam should all be done or in the process. I think your third exam runs through midnight tonight, maybe. I think that's correct. So if you haven't done the third exam, get on it. You've got your video quiz, which was, I believe, the Reza Aslan video. It looks like several of you have done it and several of you have not. That's fine. You've got, I think, the rest of the way this term to do it. So that's a total so far of 500 points that you got some total out of. And then, let's see, several of you have already turned your paper in that's due, I believe, at midnight tonight or sooner. I have not started grading those yet, but I will. I will start grading those papers at once things are done today at 1. So you can expect to start seeing those points popping up, and that'll have you up to around 700 if you've done the video quiz, which means the only thing left to be the final exam. So remember, the final exam in this class covers Judaism, Christianity, and Islam, and we'll finish that up today, and it'll be 300 points. So it'll be quite a large exam. And you'll have a shorter, I've been allowing very long periods of time for you guys to take these tests just to make sure everybody has an opportunity. But, this was a late starting class. My 3 that they put me in this summer started later than usual, 2 weeks later, to be flexible. But that means that this semester for us ends like right before, within like a week or so, just right before when opening week for faculty starts. So I'm going to have to be grading your final exams and turning those grades in really soon after our last week next week. So we sort of officially end on August 7th. I will have your final exam up for you to take beginning right after class on August 3rd. But technically, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. Yeah. So technically you have those weekdays, the 3rd, 4th, 5th, 6th, and 7th to take that exam somewhere in there. I'm not going to have near as much leeway to say, oh, okay, I'll let you still take it once that we get to that week, because the semester will just be over. At that point, you'd be looking at an incomplete for the course. So be thinking about setting aside time to take that final exam now, sometime between, think about it now, right? Between the 3rd and the 7th, all right? It seems like a lot of time compared to what most classes get, but I've just been allowing you a whole lot of extra time in here. So, okay, let's get on to business then. Let me flip back over now. Hold on. Make sure that you may have some questions or comments popping up. Let's see. Nope, so far so good. Okay. Okay, and I want to check on one other thing. Bear with me here for just a second. Uh-oh. Where did it go? Oh, that's weird. All right. Well, I want to look. I want to see how well this has all been doing. Let me see. So our most recent one was July 20. And that's live now. 286 July. 8 views. Okay. Well, it looks like maybe some people either are not watching them at all, or waiting and kind of watching them all right before the test. And that's fine. That's entirely up to you. It's just like not coming to the lecture in class in Belleville or Redbud. But I'm going to do them anyway because some of you do watch it, and so I think you'll get something out of it. So we were in Christianity. We'll finish up Christianity today and see how much further beyond that we go. We can do some of Islam today if we have time. We will certainly finish Islam next time and talk about the final exam. In fact, I'll give you some hints as to what kind of questions to expect and the topics for the essay. Now, I made a note that we were up to... we did page 1 of Paul. Okay. All right, so let's just kind of re-up where we were here. Saul of Tarsus was a Jew, but he worked for the Romans. He persecuted Christians. He had that moment on the road to Damascus where the light shone down on him, and Jesus spoke to him and said, you know, go out and the scales will fall from your eyes. You'll become a missionary. And he not only did he create churches all over the ancient world, he wrote more than half the books of the New Testament between the 50s and 60s AD, setting up those churches, right? I mean, most of his letters were his letters to the churches he had just created, telling them how to have a church. And they would get things wrong, and they'd write him letters asking, now, what were we supposed to do here in this situation? And he would say, you know, Paul's letter to the Thessalonians, you do this, you do that. That's why they're short, they're letters. He's considered the second founder of Christianity because Jesus was sort of the founder in terms of the ideas. Paul was the founder in terms of the actual structured religion. He was one of the first to state the beliefs, right? In other words, up until this point, Christianity was largely just being a Jew, and the Jewish Messiah came and he was Jesus, right? So what were your beliefs as a Christian? Jewish beliefs and Jesus, right? Paul is the one that makes it a separate religion, and he is the one that lays out what to believe in and how to be a Christian without first being a Jew. Part of this was he pushed the idea that Jesus was more God than man. That, in other words, that the Messiah was not an earthly figure, a general coming to kill Roman soldiers. The Messiah was the Son of God, a divine figure whose kingdom would be a kingdom of heaven rather than a kingdom on our earth. And I think the big thing also that Paul did was you know what? I'm sorry. And see, there's nobody watching to tell me right now live. I know the schedules are funky. Hold on. There. All right, let me back up. So he was one of the first to state the beliefs of Christianity that Jesus was more God than man. And I think the other really big important thing that Paul did was he went to the Gentiles, which is what the Jews called the non-Jews, right? The Greeks and Romans in the empire. Paul preached to the Gentiles, and he let you jump from pagan to Christian without stopping along the way to be a Jew, right? It's kind of like saying, I'm trying to think of an example. It's kind of like saying anybody that wants to drive a car, you used to have, let's just say you used to have to drive a bicycle for 5 years, and then they let you take a test to have to drive a car. And Paul is saying you can just go from walking to driving a car and just skip the bicycle altogether. You see what I mean? You skip over Judaism and go straight to Christianity as its own thing rather than as an offshoot of Judaism. And you can see he traveled all over the known world. He was the first great missionary traveling around, creating churches in all these various places. You can't see them there, but it's places like Thessalonica, so the letter to the Thessalonians, Philippi, so the letter to the Philippians, Rome, letter to the Romans, Corinth, so the letter to the Corinthians, and so on and so forth. And as a Roman citizen, he could travel like this. It was kind of like having an American passport today. And a driver's license and social security number. You were more free to go places and be allowed in and out than if you didn't have a Roman passport, basically. Again, there and Ephesus was an important one too. So you get the letter to the Ephesians, right, and on and on. He traveled all over the place. Ultimately, he was arrested. He fled capture several times, but ultimately he was arrested, and he revealed his Roman citizenship, which meant that he didn't have to be tried on the spot by some Roman soldier, which would amount to, you're guilty. In other words, he, as a Roman citizen, he had the right to return to Rome and face a judge. And so he was carried back to Rome, but it was quite a fraught journey. He speaks of it, and I guess in the Acts of the Apostles, that he speaks of how he endured all kinds of hardships on the way back to Rome. One of them was interesting was the Romans had a punishment called the 40 lashes minus one. The Romans, for whatever reason, believed if they whipped you 40 times, you'd die. So, of course, the Romans, being cruel and sadistic bastards, they would whip you 39 times. Like, oh, one more and you're dead, so we're just going to give you 39. All right, so out of his teachings and letters and travels, among other things, come the New Testament, mostly written between 70 and 150 AD. So again, these were not written by the apostles, the disciples. They were written in the spirit of, in the style of those people, according to their tradition. There was no agreement on the books of the New Testament until the 4th century when Constantine and the council there that we'll get to decided on what would be counted and what would not. They therefore had a general agreement on 27 books of the New Testament. I believe 14 are Paul's letters and 13 are the Gospels, the Acts of the Apostles, the Revelation of, all that. Some were still disputed as recently as the 16th century, particularly Hebrews, James, and Revelation, of course, is always controversial because, you've got 26 books of the New Testament that are story of Jesus's life or letters to the churches, and then you suddenly end it with this Michael Bay action film book where monsters and demons are fighting and it's the end of the world and Satan's coming out of a pit and all this. I mean, I've always said when I was a little kid in church, if I was bored, I would just get the Bible and turn to Revelation, and it was like watching a Godzilla movie. You got monsters and demons and fire breathing and all that. It's crazy. So Revelation was always controversial just because, and we don't even think that the St. John that it's the full name is the revelation of the apocalypse to John, meaning God revealed to John how the world would end to warn us. And there's argument that it's the same John as in the other books, or it's not the same John. It's generally considered it's not this. He's like John of somewhere else, like Alexandria or something. I can't remember. All right, so Constantine is the third important figure in early Christianity, right? We had Jesus, we had Paul, and now Constantine. Constantine was a Roman emperor, and at a time, I think in the 300s, where the empire was in a civil war. I like to describe it as like they were having an NCAA basketball tournament to decide who the emperor was going to be, and they were working their way through the field to the final two. And let me back up. And so what happened was, I got to explain why Constantine becomes a Christian, allegedly. What happened was, it got down to the last two generals. Constantine had his legions, and there was another general who I know his name, but I can never remember it off the top of my head. I'm sorry. But the other general, and the two of them were going to have a battle, and the winner would be the new emperor and control the entire empire for a while, right? And so the battle is going to take place at a place called the Milvian Bridge. So it's the Battle of Milvian Bridge. The night before the battle, Constantine is trying to sleep and prepare for the battle, and he has a vision. He sees this symbol here in the sky with fire, kind of like Paul saw Jesus' light shining down. And a voice says to Constantine, "By this sign conquer," meaning with this symbol, you can win. Hold on, let me check my audio. Periodically check the audio because it tends to sometimes seize up. Don't we all? So what this is allegedly God choosing sides and saying, if you believe in me, you will win. And Constantine was a pagan. He didn't care anything about Christianity at this point. But Constantine is like, what have I got to lose? Why not? And so he goes out and gets his soldiers to all paint this symbol on their armor, their shields, or whatever. Now, you might say, well, what is that? Well, if you attend, and I don't care, couldn't care less, but if you attend Christian church, maybe during the holiday season every year, you might see that symbol on the Christmas tree, or you might see it on like the altar or something in the church. This is the Greek symbol chi and rho. And what it is that the Greek alphabet has letters and sounds combinations that our alphabet doesn't have. And so they have a letter for CH, right? For us to make the CH sound, we use a C and an H together. Just like we use TH together or QU, right? In our alphabet, we have a number of combinations of letters that often go together. The Greeks had an actual letter for that sound. And so CH is the X. Is the P. So just like in Cyrillic, the Russians use a P for an R. That's why USSR in Russian is CCCP. So what this stands for is CHR. It's the first three letters in Christ. This is just another symbol for Jesus, like the cross, like the fish, etc., etc. The lamb, there are a lot of symbols for Jesus, and one of them is the Chi Rho. So he wins the battle of the Milvian Bridge, and he becomes emperor, and he realizes that Christianity is largely responsible. I think that actually it turns out that a number of his soldiers were Christian, and this just galvanized them, right? It made them like, we're fighting for Christianity now. I'm not just, in other words, they weren't just draftees fighting for somebody else's ambition. They were now fighting for their own religion. So that was pretty smart. So in being thankful, right, in thanks for this, he issues the Edict of Milan in 313, which legalizes Christianity. It recognizes Christianity as something you can do without getting in trouble anymore, right? Before, if you were found out to be Christian, you'd be fed to the lions or fight the gladiators or something. So this recognized Christianity, but he didn't stop there. So what ends up happening is that there are all these Christians across the empire that had been secret because they didn't want to get killed. Well, now they're able to come out of the woodwork, come out in the open, because it's okay to be a Christian. But the problem is they've all formed different churches with different ideas because they've been cut off, right? They couldn't openly converse, and so they were having churches that were cut off from one another. And so they were developing different theologies and ideologies. And they start fighting with each other and arguing with each other, right? Jesus was 100% God. No, Jesus was 100% man. Jesus was 50% God, 50% man. You should baptize by dunking under the river. No, you could just sprinkle some water. I mean, there was all the, you know, the blood of Christ is really just wine. No, it's actually his blood. They had so many things they disagreed over, right? You have to do every year service in Latin. No, you can do it in Greek, you know. They had so many things to disagree over that they were yelling and screaming and fighting. And Constantine was like, shut up, shut up, shut up. If I had known you were going to argue like this, I wouldn't have let you out. So he says, we got to have a meeting to decide what Christians believe. Now, he is not yet a Christian. He has used it for its value to help him win a battle in an empire. But he is still a pagan. So Constantine says, we've got to have a big meeting and bring all these church leaders in and have them iron it out. They're going to hash it out and iron out one set of beliefs that every Christian is going to believe, so they'll stop arguing and give me a headache. So he convenes the Council of Nicaea in 325 AD. Constantine convenes the Council. Interestingly enough, this is a pagan emperor convening a Christianity summit in a city that is today Muslim in Turkey, but it was Greek and Roman back then. So at the Council of Nicaea, Constantine lets each, group give their position, and he kind of goes, okay, interesting. You, yes, interesting, okay. And when the Council of Nicaea was over, he announced, okay, I am now going to tell all you Christians what all Christians in the empire believe. You believe in this, you believe in this, you believe in this. You have a pagan Roman emperor deciding what Christians believe, and that became known as the Nicene Creed, which later gets slightly modified into the Apostles' Creed. So when in church people say, I believe in God the Father Almighty, maker of heaven and earth, and Jesus Christ, his only Son, our Lord, who was conceived by the Holy Ghost, born of the Virgin Mary, suffered under Pontius Pilate, crucified, dead, and buried. He descended to hell. Some don't say that. Third day he rose again from the dead and sitteth on the right hand of God the Father Almighty. From thence he shall come to judge the quick and the dead. I believe in the Holy Ghost, the Holy Catholic Church, the communion of saints, the forgiveness of sins, the resurrection of the body. Amen. When you do that, boom. Let me drop my mic. When you do that, though, you're reciting words that were more or less essentially dictated by a pagan Roman emperor. But he said, this is what Christians believe. If you don't like it, your other alternative is, that's fine. That's fine. If you don't want to believe it, your other alternative is, I will kill you. So you have a choice, right? You can believe what I just said. I believe in God the Father Almighty and all that. Or you can be put to death. So you can imagine that the Christians weren't that concerned that it was a pagan telling them what they believe. They just didn't want to die quite yet. So the Nicene Creed eventually gives way to the Apostles' Creed and all that. You can still find it in hymn books and Bibles, though. And a lot of it was over the nature of Christ, which I said was, is he more man? Is he more God? Is he the Son of God? Is he a prophet? What is he exactly? And they argued over that. And by the way, a lot of little factions that didn't want to go along with Constantine's decree went and hid in places like Lebanon. So to this day, if you go to Lebanon today, there are little factions of Christianity that their beliefs are completely different from mainstream Christianity in the rest of the world that have been there for almost 2,000 years. Just up in the mountains doing their own thing. The Maronites, the Druze, they're a bunch. It's really remarkable. Because they would have been killed if they espoused those views in Europe. So by the end of the 4th century, allegedly Constantine did convert on his deathbed, and there's some evidence for that and against that. The evidence for it is that back then, some people thought it was best to wait until right before you die to convert. It's kind of like the what happens in Vegas stays in Vegas idea, that if you converted to Christianity and then went and partied in Vegas, you'll go to hell. But if you party in Vegas and then convert to Christianity and then die, you'll go to heaven. Now, I'm sure that God, as my understanding, right, would look at all that and go, oh, come on, you're just trying to game the system here, right? What matters is what's in your heart and all that. But again, this is a church and a religion that is trying to be very technical. They're trying to have everything kind of laid out, and so they're saying this is the order you do it in. And so you convert on your deathbed. That way you don't commit any sins after you convert. Okay, fine. There's more stuff Constantine does before he dies, by the way, but I just had to get to that. So by the end of the 4th century, you do have a couple of emperors later. I think there's one called the Apostate, who tried to take the empire back to paganism, but it didn't stick. Europe had become a Christian continent, and it was going to be a lot of it, and it was going to be very difficult to take that back away from them. Now, not all of it. It also would take several centuries for all of Europe to become Christian. Of course, the Vikings were the last holdout, of course, but eventually it gets them all. All right, so the empire looks like this at its height, but it's divided because it was just too much for one emperor to rule. And so Diocletian divides it in half, and with a Western emperor and an Eastern emperor. And then Constantine, by the way, I told you there's something else he did. Constantine decides that now if the empire is going to be Christian, he doesn't want the capital to be a pagan city that's been pagan, feeding Christians to the lions for 300 years. So he says, we're going to build a new capital. Well, if you're going to build a new capital, you might as well put it somewhere where there's a lot of wealth. Now, I've mentioned in World Civ before, by this point in Roman history, and we're back in the 300s, 400s, at this point in Roman history, Western Europe was the poor part of the empire, right? Today we look at this map and say, I bet this is where all the money is, right? Britain and France, Spain. Italy, right? You'd think. But remember, back then you didn't have all the big cities and technology and everything. Europe ended at the Atlantic Ocean, and there was nothing out there. So there was nowhere for them to trade. And you had all these barbarians along the Rhine-Danube frontier, just waiting to invade. Meanwhile, in the East, they were doing the Silk Road trade with China and with India. They were trading in Egypt. They were trading with the Slavs in Russia. This was the wealthy part of the empire. And so Constantine says, we're going to build a capital right here that's in the middle of things. It's on the crossroads between Europe and Asia. They called Turkey Asia back then. Asia Minor today is what we call it. It's on the crossroads between Europe and Asia, and it's on the crossroads between the Black Sea and the Mediterranean. So it's got a land bridge and it's got a water bridge, basically. So this is just a prime location. And it's even better than that. If I could zoom in, I would show you Constantinople, which is today Istanbul, was just a perfect location to build a powerful city. So Eastern and Western Christianity develops because the empire was divided in half, and they really the two halves kind of quit talking to each other. So the Pope in Rome builds up Christianity here, whereas the emperor in Constantinople builds up Christianity here. So what that means is that today you get this division over time, where the Western church, like the France, Spain, Italy part, has the Pope. There's the Pope in Rome. And it's called Roman Catholicism, goes back to the Roman Empire. But in the East, you have a separate Christian church, which had patriarchs, which still does have patriarchs rather than bishops and popes and the Pope. They used to serve the emperor, not anymore, because there's no emperor anymore. The emperor had religious authority while he was still around instead of the Pope. And they refused to accept the authority of the Pope because they had the emperor. What do they need a Pope for? Pope was just the most powerful bishop. And so it becomes what we call Eastern Orthodoxy or Greek Orthodox or just Orthodox. Catholic means universal. Orthodox means kind of standard, regular. So they're both claiming to be universal, standard, and regular churches, even though they're opposition to each other. The two churches, by the way, over the years have tried to get back together, but something always keeps them from reforming. And so they just continue on as the earliest two branches of Christianity. Of course, we'll get a third branch coming up later, thanks to Martin Luther, won't we? So here's the division today. The blue parts are Catholic. Ireland, of course, is Catholic, except for Northern Ireland, plus Western Europe. The purple parts are Protestant because it was Germans and the Scandinavians that followed Martin Luther. Britain is considered Protestant too, but it's really its own separate thing, the Church of England. And then red here is Orthodox Christianity. The green is Islam, by the way, and some Buddhists, interestingly. Okay. So this was the great cathedral of Orthodoxy for a very long time, up until 1453. It's still there, that building. It was just in the news last week that the Turks are going to make it a mosque again instead of it being a museum, which is really unfortunate. There it is today. It's been a museum since 1930 or something, but well. This is interesting. Inside the Hagia Sophia, this is the Hagia Sophia, the Church of the Holy Wisdom. Inside, here is the Emperor Constantine that built the city, and he's presenting Jesus. There's Jesus with a little tiny head. He's presenting Jesus with the city of Constantinople that was named after him. And over here it says in Greek, Konstantinos. Constantine, the Emperor Constantine. Over here, though, this was all built by the Emperor Justinian. So over here you have Justinian, Justinianos, and he's giving Jesus this church. So there's a picture of this church on the wall of this church. I think that's hilarious. And they also have a picture of what I call Make My Day Jesus, because I'll talk about this in World Civ, but I haven't mentioned it here yet. Constantinople wasn't a really good location in terms of making money. It was also in a really good location in terms of having a lot of enemies want to attack it. And so they didn't want Jesus to appear weak. They needed him to appear strong and scary. And so rather than showing him crucified, the suffering Savior, the Constantinople would depict Jesus as like reaching for his sword there or his gun or something, right? This is cold-eyed, make my day Jesus. Now, I told you there was a third version that comes along. And, of course, that is the Protestant version with Martin Luther in 1517. There's a whole origin story to Martin Luther, but it really comes down to he was a fairly educated guy who became a priest, kind of against his will to some degree. He became a priest. He didn't agree with a lot of the practices the Catholic Church was doing at that time. Because understand, this is a long time ago, right? It's over 500 years ago. And he felt like a lot of what the Catholic Church was doing was corrupt and was to make money rather than to actually save souls, which he thought was the main thing. He also understood that with the new printing press, with Gutenberg, anybody could have a Bible, and he thought it was important. He advocated this sort of personal relationship with God, right? That you pray to God. You don't need somebody else to do it for you. So he didn't feel like everybody should learn Latin, or he didn't feel like everybody should have to go to a priest who spoke Latin. He felt like the Bible should be printed in your language and you read it yourself and have a personal relationship. So He didn't like things famously like the selling of indulgences either, which is kind of a loophole where the church would make money off of people that wanted to go party in the equivalent of Vegas. Okay. So he posted 95 Theses, which is the equivalent today of putting it on Facebook, putting it in on a chat room or something, right? Tweeting it. I can just see Martin Luther, 95 Theses, a thread, 1/95, tweet, and then, tweet. So he posts these theses objecting to various practices of the Catholic Church as it existed 503 years ago. He didn't intend to start a new religion. He didn't even intend to start a new sect of Christianity. He just wanted to change things. But of course, religions never want to change, but people do. And so what always happens, right? Think about when Buddha tried to change Hinduism and instead you got Buddhism. So instead of getting instead of Christianity changing, you get a new version of Christianity called Protestantism. It becomes a denominational movement. What does that mean? Well, think about, there's two things we really talk about having denominations: churches and money. Now, what separates denominations of money is all American cash money. I only wish I had some. I would show you, but I don't. All American cash money is the same in one way, right? It's all American money. If you bought something that cost $1 at Dollar General, you could give them a 1 plus probably tax, a 5, a 10, a 20, a 50, a 100. You could give them any of that and it would all work. You get back different amounts of change, but it would all buy you something, right? It all works the same way. But on the other hand, you'd get back a different amount of change with each one because they're different denominations. So a denomination is like different versions of the same thing. So the Methodists, the Baptists, the Presbyterians, the Church of Christ, they're not, they're all Protestant Christian churches. So they're the same thing in a way, but yet they're different in ways. And so we call them denominations. Just like a 5 versus a 10 versus a 20, right? They are different denominations of basically the same thing. So similar doctrine, but different practices. And I ran through some of those a while ago, like how much water do you have to use to baptize? How often do you do communion? Blah, 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 blah. Now, the King James Bible comes along a little bit later after Martin Luther, because one of the things that Luther was stressing was that everybody should be able to read the Bible for themselves. And people that spoke English didn't have an English language Bible, really. There was a couple of things, but you really didn't. And so the newly crowned King of England, King James, who had been King of Scotland before this, and he was a Catholic, interestingly enough, James orders a new English translation of the Bible to be made around 1611. Yeah. Now, interestingly, the English language had firmly taken root by this point, even though it is a more recent language than the other European languages. And English is always in transition, of course. It's always changing. But what makes it so interesting is that in 1611, the first Queen Elizabeth had just died, and the Tudor dynasty had ended. So there was no Bible in English all the way up through Henry VIII and Bloody Mary and Elizabeth I. So James and his family take over after the Tudor family ends, and he has this new English translation put together. Now, interestingly, this is just after Shakespeare has died too, I believe. It's certainly after he wrote the last of his plays. And so if you compare the language in the King James Bible to Shakespeare, I know that Shakespeare sounds really highfalutin and old-fashioned and all that. It's actually more modern sounding than the King James Bible. And that's on purpose. The way that the King James Bible sounds with all the thee, thy, and therefore thy fathers shall go forth ye unto the, all of that, it sounds great. It sounds really cool. But people didn't talk like that anymore in England. King James had the translators make it sound that way on purpose because he knew how cool it sounded. That's what always blows my mind is that he, people were speaking the way they do in Shakespeare plays by 1611, and he's like, no, that wouldn't sound as good. Let's go ahead and use the full flowery language that we used to just a few years ago. So you get this translation. It conformed the views of the Church of England rather than the Catholic Church. That's important. It's been very influential, particularly in Protestant churches. It became kind of this is funny. It was ordered translated by a Catholic, and it was translated by the Church of England, and yet it has become the sort of Protestant, really the Baptist particularly, right, default Bible. I always tell this story that I was in church in a little country church in Georgia for the first time 25 years ago. Wow. And I was there, and the minister, I was on a first church date. I'd gone on dates with this young woman, but it's not my wife. But this was the first time I'd gone to church with her, and it was this little independent Baptist church out in the country. And I figured, well, I'm gonna get my Bible off the shelf. I'll take my Bible with me. That'll be good. And I didn't really look too closely. It was just a Bible I'd gotten when I graduated high school, and it was, a nice leather, nice bound Bible. And the minister at one point says, now you all better have your King James Bibles, because if you got that NIV, man, that isn't biblical, and Satan's liable to just reach right up from the ground and drag you screaming down into hell. You burst into flames if you have that NIV. And I was sitting there going, well, I sure am glad I don't have whatever that NIV thing is. No, I have the New International Version, which NIV. So I kind of hid it behind me for the rest of the service and never brought it again. So the King James translation is the influential one, and it's because it just sounds so good, right? I mean, if you have a modern translation, it might say, I have to walk through this valley and it's scary, but I'm sure God will look after me. Well, that's great, but it doesn't sound all that great. Whereas the King James says, lo, though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, I will fear no evil. That sounds so much cooler. It just sounds better. And that's what makes the King James so popular. Oh, then we have the Mormons real quick. So they are the Latter-day Saint movement. And it all goes back to Joseph Smith in the 1830s and 40s. I'm going to tell you the story real quick. So Joseph Smith grows up in upstate New York, Elmira, New York, in what's called the burned over district, where everybody's just burning up with evangelistic religious fervor, Christian fervor. And they all believed that only their church was right. Every church believed only their church was right. And all of the churches, you go to hell just as soon as if you were a Muslim or a pagan or whatever, right? Only our church, which is a really weird way of looking at religion. It believes that heaven is the size of the room I'm in now, and hell is the size of the Pacific Ocean, apparently, because only one church gets to go to heaven out of all that. It's insane. But anyway, so the problem that Joseph Smith had was his parents, as a young man, his parents were of different churches. So they were both being told only the church that's right, that's true, do you get to go to heaven. So Joseph Smith is like, A, one of my parents is definitely going to hell. Oh, no. And B, I don't want to join, I want to be in the one that's not going to hell, but I don't know which one it is. So one night, one day he's out walking in the woods by himself. And he runs into, I kid you not, God and Jesus both hanging out in the woods. And they say, oh, Joseph, we will answer one question for you. And he knows exactly what question to ask. And he says, which church is true? Right? Because that's the burning question he wants to know, is which church is true? And the answer he gets back would rock his foundations and change the world. The answer he gets back is none of them. So Joseph Smith, now a very devout Christian young man, has been told that none of the churches are true. None is or none are. And so he's really distraught now. And when he's lying in his bed one night, the angel Moroni. You know, there's Gabriel and whoever else, Lucifer, infamously, right? Well, the angel Moroni comes to him like Gabriel came to Mary, I guess, right? And says, go out in the woods and dig a hole in the ground and you will find the answers. And so he gets up and goes out in the woods and digs up these, allegedly, these gold plates that are stuff written on them. And he transcribes it all onto paper. He goes and buries them again, and they're never seen again. They're gone. And he's just written down the Book of Mormon, a third testament. So I always say, what makes Mormons Christian? They're very similar to Muslims in a lot of this, right? You have a prophet, Joseph Smith, who had an angel visit him, like Muhammad was the prophet and had Gabriel visit him and reveal a book to him, exact same as Islam. Believe in plural marriage, just like Islam. But here's the difference. Muhammad said, get rid of your other books. All you need is the one I just wrote that I just got from God. Joseph Smith says you keep the Old Testament, you keep the New Testament, this is a third testament. That's the difference. If Joseph Smith had said, throw away the Bible, all you need is the Book of Mormon, it would be a separate religion like Islam is. But it's not. So Joseph Smith writes down the Book of Mormon. It is divine scripture, extremely controversial. All right, so they get persecuted. They're having multiple wives and everything. They're persecuted in New York. He says, that's all right. God has shown me where the Garden of Eden is, and we're going to go get to live in it. And they're like, oh, where's the Garden of Eden? And of course, those of you, in this area know exactly. It's Missouri. God told Joseph Smith the Garden of Eden was Missouri. I guess God really liked baseball. And so they pack up and go to Missouri, whereupon the governor of Missouri takes such exception to them and their practices, their weird new religion and their polygamy, that he issues an extermination order. It's open season on Mormons. If you see a Mormon, you can just gun them down in the streets and not go to jail. So there's a gunfight. And as you might imagine, the Mormons pack up and move again. This time they move over to Illinois, to Nauvoo. There they build a whole town in Nauvoo for Mormons. But he's arrested. He's arrested for being the leader of this group that's doing these things that are not normal to the people of Illinois. And they lock him up in the third floor of the courthouse building to await trial. During the night, a lynch mob comes for him, and in a blaze of bullets, he goes out the window of the third floor of the courthouse and falls to his death. They thought they have ended Mormonism forever. But his right-hand man was Brigham Young. You may have heard of the college, right? The University in Utah. Brigham Young gathers everybody together and says, we're going to move so far away that they'll never catch us. And in 1847, he takes over and he moves them all to Utah. They go west, west, west until they get to the Salt Lake Valley, Salt Lake, the Great Salt Lake and Salt Lake Valley. They found Salt Lake City, Provo, Orem, all that, because they figured nobody else is going to want to go there. It's a desert. It's the Salt Desert. Okay, last couple of things about Christianity. And by the way, they used to be horribly hounded. They were considered no better than Al-Qaeda, than terrorists. But in the 20th century, they really rehabilitated their image. They outlawed polygamy for the most part. And they formed the Mormon Tabernacle Choir, for example, which gets them a lot of good publicity. And today, Mormons are just seen as the salt of the earth. Mitt Romney is a Mormon. And they're just seen as like the best, nicest people. So there's been few cases in history of a better public relations campaign than what the Mormons were able to do. Give them credit for that. Okay, Christian holy days, about Sunday. That's not the Sabbath, but the Romans said, well, you can't really have Saturday. We're using that. You can have Sunday. So they said, fine, we'll take Sunday. Christmas, of course, is when Christians celebrate the birth of Christ. They have no idea, of course, when Jesus was actually born, but go with the winter solstice, I guess. Good Friday is the day of the crucifixion, and then Easter Sunday, the day of the resurrection, and then that's on the spring, like the beginning of spring. Of course, it's not set on any particular day either. It even moves between March and April to show you they really have no idea. But it's there at the beginning of spring because it was seen by the Romans that a time of rebirth and resurrection would fit in with their holiday about fertility and birth. And so that's where you get the bunny rabbits and the eggs, symbols of fertility, along with Jesus's resurrection. I just thought I found these maps that kind of fit in. This is Jews around America by county, about where you would expect: the Northeast, Miami, Las Vegas, LA, San Francisco, St. Louis, right? About what you'd expect. I just thought that was in Chicago, about interesting. And then Mormons, of course, the Mormons are focused mainly around Utah. And there's Mormons again by county. Catholics are the darker colors, are more Catholic. So the Northeast, the upper Midwest, and the Southwest. These are mostly German Catholics here, mostly Hispanic Catholics here, and French Catholics, the Cajuns, here. That's the Catholic Church in red and non-Catholic in blue. The Mormons, and who is it that's blocking them out down here? We're about to see. So Episcopalians are pretty well spread out. That's the Church of England in America, famously the George H.W. Bush religion. Presbyterians, that's my father's side of the family's religion, spread out all across the country. A lot of them in South Carolina. That's where my family is originally mostly from, in South Carolina. Although I'm from Alabama by way of Atlanta up to Illinois. Methodists, interesting that Methodists arrived on our shores from England and they just kept moving west until they got to the Great Plains, and they must have just really loved them some great. I always say the Methodists saw the Rocky Mountains and said, let's just stay here. They just kind of washed up on the shores of the Rockies and stopped. Not a lot of them out there. And then there's what's taking up the space from the Catholics in the South is Baptists. It's amazing how this it's almost a perfect match with the Confederacy, but it is a perfect match with the slave states and sympathetic areas like Southern Illinois. This is the old Confederacy. These are the slave states. I don't know what that means, but must mean something. All right, so that's Christianity. Next time we will do Islam, Muhammad, and all that, the Quran, and that'll be our last stop, and we will talk about the test, the final exam. So if you have any questions, anything, drop me an email, or we can have a meeting online. Apparently we're going to be doing our meetings, our class, our outside of class office hour type meetings through online this fall as well, but we will be meeting in the classroom at least half the time for classes. So, all right, I hope you guys have a good week. We have one more to go. Don't forget get your paper turned in, and I will see you guys for one more online class on a week from today. Bye-bye.